Hello and welcome to Capitol Hill. I'm Latika Berg. Well, depending on what way you look at it, or maybe which side of politics you're from, the International Monetary Fund's latest global outlook shows Australia performing better than most, or not as well as previously anticipated. The government and opposition both seized on the IMF's latest digest and had very different interpretations. Joining me to give their own take on the numbers are the Liberal MP Ken Wyatt in Perth and the Labor MP Michael Danby in Melbourne. Gentlemen, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Latika.
Hi, thank you.
But first, let's take a look at the reaction to the IMF's slight downgrade of Australia's expected economic growth.
Well, the IMF forecasts are consistent with our forecasts that were in the mid-year budget update. But I'd like to make this point about the IMF forecasts. The IMF forecasts show that the Australian economy will outperform every other major advanced economy this year and next.
This is an underperforming economy, and it's underperforming because of the poor economic management of the current government.
Now, on the day on which the IMF has said our economy is beating the world, Tony Abbott has been out today talking our economy down. Now that negativity from Mr Abbott costs. That negativity scaring people about our economy when it is a world beater costs.
Ken Wyatt, it's a very minuscule downgrade since last September. Is that really enough evidence to declare the economy underperforming?
I think if we look at all the indicators, I would have expected our economy to be much stronger, particularly with the mining boom. But I think our other challenge is that our manufacturing sector, such as those in my electorate of Hasluck, are not performing at the same level. So when Tony makes the comment about the underperformance, we've got to look at all the other indicators that come into that other than just the bottom line. And the report indicates that Australia is doing well out of a number of countries that are struggling with their finances. So whilst that's a plus, we also have to look at the underlying issues within our economy and address those because we are brittle.
Ken, do you blame, like Tony Abbott, your leader, do you blame the government for the economy underperforming as you describe it?
Look, I think a couple of policy issues that are going to be significant because the policy, in reading the report, it talks about the policymakers really need to take a very considered, measured approach to our economy and its growth. And the mining tax and the carbon tax are not going to help that at the time.
Those are two taxes that are not yet in place.
No, but they're going to impact because the other thing that we've also got to consider is we're part of a global economy, and that's already showing evidence in the way that some of our manufacturing have not realised the outcomes nor the financial contribution that has been forecasted. And so all those factors, when you add them together, do impact on the Australian economy. So I'd rather see us not take an economy that has been stable and healthy in the context of the global financial situation and become brittle because Australia can't afford that.
Michael Danby, the IMF also warned policymakers not to become too optimistic with slight recoveries or evidence of that. Do you think now is a good time to be pulling so much public spending out of the budget as you work towards that surplus?
In international economic circumstances for Australia, who rated top of the IMF ratings for economic growth, to be running a budget surplus just makes us look top of the tree compared to other countries.
But what if that? But Michael, what if pulling out all that spending affects economic growth, and then we see economic growth come in actually lower than the forecast because that public spending has been pulled?
What if running the budget surplus leads to responsible cut by the Reserve Bank in interest rates, and that leads to economic growth? I think that's the Treasurer's strategy. That's the widespread view from Treasury. That's what a lot of economists expect the effect of this to be, and we're paying down the debt. So, you have an Australian government doing the moderate, responsible fiscal duty, and Australia, compared to everywhere else, doing really well, and there are no other countries that are running budget surpluses, and they're running huge deficits because they simply cannot pay off their debts. There are enormous problems in Spain with that bond issue that they had just the other day. Tony Abbott, as Albo says, is sort of like a political vuvuzela. He just is constantly no, negative. I don't think the Australian people will appreciate this if the budget surplus leads to an interest rate cut, which I hope. In fact, I'd go further and join Paul House and Gary Weaven and say that they should be permanently looking at other issues other than inflation. Then
Michael,
we'll have the result we want.
Michael, just on that, there are a lot of economists who think that the Reserve should have cut rates by now, that they don't actually need a budget surplus for a rate cut, and that one is well overdue next month. Do you agree with that school of thought that they should have cut rates by now, and in that case they didn't need a budget surplus for it?
Well, maybe they'll do something that people don't expect and cut it by a full half point rather than just 0.25.
Do you think that's what's needed?
I think there are a lot of people in small business who are being unnecessarily hurt by high interest rates, and I agree with Gary Weaven's logic this morning when he said that before the GFC they held interest rates too high, and in the post-GFC circumstances I think they've done the same thing. But that's partially because they have a criteria of only considering inflation and not the effect on employment.
Okay, well, to date, Yes, Ken.
Let me say this, Letica. I think one of the things that we should seriously consider in all of this debate is a very measured approach for Australia because, as I said, we've done well based on the report, but anything that creates a greater fragility will impact in a way that we don't need, and the unintended consequences will certainly hurt families. And I hear the points that Michael's making, but this is a time when we need measured approaches. I'm not totally supportive of finding a surplus at this point in time. I think some of the economic commentary around this does identify that we do need to ensure that our economy grows and it builds on the strength of what we've achieved so far. But the outcomes must be about increasing productivity, increasing the economic base that we have, but
so, Ken,
also
you're saying
certainly ensuring jobs.
You don't think we need a surplus delivered in May?
Look, I would not be perturbed if we didn't have a surplus in May, because I think that we have to seriously consider the growth of our economy and its continued health against the international structures that prevail.
Okay, well, let's look a bit more at the budget. A lot of the focus so far has been on the spending cuts we can expect. But today the government announced a $1,000 cash bonus program for employers who take on older workers.
We still need to deal with a cultural issue in the Australian business community that sometimes looks past the value of older workers. We know that older workers have lower absenteeism, they have higher retention rates, and they bring with them an extraordinary wisdom and experience. We just need to push through this barrier that some Australian employers still have about taking on an older worker. So this $1,000 incentive for employers to look at workers over 50 years of age, we think will go some way in making sure that the needs of the business community meet the needs of older Australians who want to keep contributing to work.
Michael Danby, what's to stop employers pocketing the cash and firing their older employees 3 months later?
I suppose ethics. I think that would be something that not any responsible employer that I know would do. But the idea that Mark Butler's had of finding some little incentive that will motivate people to take on skilled older people is a very good idea. Look, we've got a labour shortage in Australia, despite the fact we've got 180,000 immigrants coming into the country, mainly skilled immigrants who we pick and choose from around the world. And we need these extra people. And if this little tweak by Mark Butler and approved of by Wayne Swan works in getting some older Australians, many of whom I know come to my office who are skilled, can't understand why they're not re-employed as an accountant or in management. I think it's a good idea.
So, Ken Wyatt, if we have a labour shortage, why do employers need money to take on workers?
Well, in one sense, the incentive encourages people to get rid of that notion of ageism. And I think that's a problem for us as a country, this mindset around ageism. Let me say I must congratulate Labor on taking one of our 2007 policy initiatives and putting it into place. Because,
good on you, Ken.
Michael, I think you're right in that sense, mate, that it gives us a chance to retain the wisdom, the knowledge, but the life experiences and the skills of people who've got a lot to contribute. And let me say, in Aboriginal society, elders are revered, and certainly I would hope that in the future Australia does the same for our ageing workforce, and I mean that in quotation marks, because I don't see why we should throw out quality people and leave them outside of the workforce when they have so much to contribute and will make a contribution not only to our country's economy but to the global economy.
All right, gentlemen, well, just quickly, I just wanted to end with your thoughts on the Prime Minister's announcement yesterday that Australian troops will leave Afghanistan earlier than planned. Firstly, Ken Wyatt, the opposition sought a briefing for that. Do you support that?
Look, on any decision around military extraction from a campaign or from a commitment such as we have under the alliance with the other nations, the advice of our military commanders, I think, is absolutely critical. And if that's the basis for us withdrawing and it's not a political agenda, then I welcome that decision because, look, families want to be with families, and having spent 2 weeks on the HMAS Melbourne in the Red Sea in their work that they're doing in the Middle East, it was a tremendous experience of seeing firsthand what our servicemen and women do and what they do to contribute to the alliance and to reducing global terrorism.
And Michael Danby, the Prime Minister, also had some very frank words to say about Pakistan. Do you think Pakistan is the real issue that everyone's ignoring?
I think the drawdown in Afghanistan can take place securely. We're transiting the Afghan National Army. We're going to be paying a subsidy to them for quite a period of time to see that they can remain active in the field against the Taliban. But you're absolutely right. None of this can be successful if the Pakistani intelligence service is still continuing to wind up the Afghan and Pakistani Taliban. And it's intolerable that our blokes and other Western troops are being killed by plastic explosive or other explosives in these IEDs that are made in factories in Pakistan. I think Pakistan is a real problem. They have to have a good look at themselves, and I would, continue to support, as I know the Australian government does, a continuing sort of active measures against people who are involved in terrorism in Pakistan against Afghanistan. If the Pakistani authorities are not willing to brace up and run their own country so that it's not a threat to other people.
Okay, Michael Danby, Ken Wyatt, that's where we'll have to leave the program today. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Latika.
And
Thanks, Latika.
Thank you for joining us on Capitol Hill today. We'll see you again tomorrow.